And welcome to a new episode of Dynasty Mind. Tonight, I have a fantastic guest, Mr. Fantrax, the face of the Fantrax franchise, Andy Singleton at People's Pen on Twitter. How are you doing tonight, Andy?
I'm pretty good, man. I'm happy to be here. This is a great little project you're working on. I think this is tremendous. You've had some incredible guests to get this going, which speaks to how well you're regarded and respected in this industry. So I thank you for letting me join the lexicon of uh, royalty, if you will, in the dynasty fantasy football industry. I feel like I'm crashing the party. Like I almost don't deserve to be here, and I'm just kind of crashing the party. But I'm happy to be here joining you tonight. So thank you.
Oh man, you're flattering me. I'm only a small time dynasty guy trying to just make people recognize the hard work that people like you put out there, and I know you and John has done an amazing job to preparing us for this dynasty season, and we're continuing on with all the rookies, the fantasy profiles, and everything you guys put up there has been informative to me as well as to a lot of my readers. They let me know, hey, what resources are out there. I'm like, first things first, go to Fantrax. It's already broken down. They prepared this even as the mainstream media are just trying to catch up to everything that's going on. So I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to just dig into your dynasty mind. So tell us, Andy, how did you get into fantasy football and dynasty and all of this craziness that we do for 12 months of the year? We don't stop.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey for me personally. I mean, I've been just a diehard sports fanatic my entire life. I'm sure a lot of people that play fantasy games can relate to that. I mean, going back as far as I can remember being 8 years old and just keeping myself occupied and using baseball cards or statistics wherever I could find them and making up my own games and rolling dice and setting guys up and building my own kind of imaginary rosters, if you will. Like imagine if this teammate this trade with this guy. I mean, this is pre teenage. Before I'm even 10, I'm doing stuff like that. So once I got introduced to the fantasy game, this was actually kind of a funny story because I'm born in '75. And I was working as an office assistant at my stepfather's office. So I'm like 13, 14 at the time, just simple things, taking out the garbage and all that kind of stuff. And one of the guys that worked there was in a fantasy baseball league, and everything was by fax back then. Everything was handwritten. Stats were, done. Everything was really a labor of love. And I thought he was the coolest dude in the world because I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And he's like, what's wrong with you, kid? Like, I'm a nerd. Like, this is not cool. Like, I'm sneaking from your stepfather to write down stats and scores and then fax them to my 11 other nerdy friends so we can, celebrate. And so that to me is as far back as fantasy goes. And the advent of the computer and the internet and everything like that has just heightened and extremely catapulted what we think of this game now. So for me to have landed now at a place like Fantrax, it's kind of feels like a perfect fit for me because I'm at a place that's super customizable, that runs leagues, that is now doing content, so I can talk about the games I'm playing and then convince people to come over to Fantrax and use Fantrax as a league manager and run your fantasy leagues there as well. So it's all come kind of full circle for me. But when I first got into this industry in particular, it's about 6 years ago now, and I started doing baseball writing. I'm big into fantasy baseball as well. And basically, I was writing kind of like editorial stuff, just commentary, social commentary, things like that. And around August, I was gearing up for my personal fantasy football leagues, and I just put out my quarterback rankings. I think I went like 30 deep, and I just put out redraft quarterback rankings. And within a day, it had like 1,000 hits, and it was the most read article I had put out in about 6 months' time. Stuff I had like really researched and worked hard on. Just my rankings, just 1 through 30, was through the roof, and I immediately said, well, I got to do more of this fantasy football stuff, and it just kind of led to that. So now, fast forward 6 years, I've done writing, podcasting. But my primary focus now is the video stuff, uh, editing, you name it. I feel like I've done it, and just happy to, finally be in a position where, like you said, getting some recognition and being able to come on as a guest and share what I can share with whoever's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's Fantrax is fortunate to have someone as passionate as you about fantasy football, fantasy baseball, just making the fantasy industry has come a long way. And while I haven't lived through that era where people are considering, playing fantasy sports as only a nerd thing, I do think that we've come a very long way where the regular people who are up top in the CEO industry, all the way down to people who do blue collar jobs, are like, who should I draft? What do I have to prepare? This is a great game for us to talk and discuss, and we're having fun and connecting with people. I know I connect with a lot of my friends. I even connect with people who I've never met in real life, and this is all possible through fantasy football. And in Dynasty Realm, I've met people for 5 years that I've never met face to face, but we've been so involved with each other's lives that we feel like we know each other so well. So it's fun. It's a fun sport, and I'm glad Fantrax is one of those platforms. And I can vouch for that because I have several leagues on there. It has seen a tremendous growth, and I'll let you, before we sign off today, kind of talk about what's happening on Fantrax. But some of the best feature I think you'll have on there is the college football fantasy sports up there. I'm in the middle of a draft right now, and it's crazy. And I'll tell you all about it off air later on. But let's dive into it. Let's dive into the season. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just take that as a quick little talking point, just to say, you mentioned the college football. We do have season-long college fantasy football, but there's also a new Devi tool that integrates your college and your pro rosters. So you can have it all in one place, no placeholders, anything at all like that needed. You can have a roster that has your NFL guys as well as your Devi guys that are still in college. You can trade them. It's all there. You don't have to make up names as placeholders. And then the other thing is the site is up. The leagues are accessible and draftable and runnable 365 days out of the year. So there is no downtime or lag either. So that's just another bonus to why, especially for a dynasty league. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I will have to let our LM know that it's merged now. We can do the Devi transfer because we had two separate leagues where one is all college, one is NFL, but we will do a manual transfer later on. But fun, awesome. This is the only platform that I know would allow us to do that right now, and this is why you need to sign up for Fantrax, guys. But let's talk about it. We are in an exciting part of the season. The draft happened 2 weeks ago. I can't believe it's only happened like 2 weeks ago. And a lot of buzz, a lot of new things that comes around. What are some of your initial thoughts about what you experienced from day 1 through day 3 of the draft?
Yeah, some surprises. A lot of other things shaped out kind of the way I figured they would. The wide receiver class was, talked heavily as being deep, but not really top end heavy, not really a clear cut number one guy. And I think we saw how that kind of shaped out, where you see guys like Anthony Miller, who some people love, some people had questions about, guys like Michael Gallup, who wasn't talked about as much as some other players, but was kind of universally liked, but I don't know if you'd say loved. It feels like there were a lot of, I like him a lot, but I'm not willing to commit to this guy in the wide receiver class this year. And then after you see where they land in the draft, now all of a sudden, we kind of change our opinions a little bit or reposition, revalue. The running backs were surprising to me just in the order they went. Quarterbacks, I mean, I was a little surprised to see Rosen slip, if you want to call it a slip. I know he, said he was disrespected and slighted by it, but I think top 10 pick in the NFL. I don't know how much motivation or fire you can get under your belly. That's not, you're not in the green room too long, slipping a 10, and he gets Christian Kirk there that he's going to be able to develop a chemistry with, and one of my favorite receivers from this class. So he's got Fitzgerald there as well. He's got David Johnson coming back. I mean, you have nice things that he's ready to start right out of the gate with, and I think it's a nice landing spot for him. But overall, I mean, John and I, you mentioned the profiles we were doing. We profiled 50 players, all offensive, no IDP yet for this series, but 50 players, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And we started back around Thanksgiving time and went all the way up to the week before the draft. And these were basically 5-minute video breakdowns of background, who the guy is, where he's from, how old he is, what his stats were, what his production in college was like, what his teams were like, all that kind of stuff. And then we went and looked at handful of games for each player and what we saw on tape, what we thought about the athlete, what we thought about how he moved in the offense, what we thought about how he, how he caught the ball or how he ran his routes or, broke tackles, things of that nature. And, you get some people that agree with you, a lot of people, more people that disagree with you than agree with you. But I'm giving my opinions based on, it's funny. I cover football and baseball now, but I was a D1 college basketball player, and that's, still a passion of mine, but it's just, I don't talk about it at all because I'm too busy talking about football and baseball. But when I'm looking at players, I'm looking at the athlete. I'm looking at just certain athletic traits. And then, not to get too crazy, but I look at a lot of the mental aspects of the game as well and how that can affect the players. So, there's so many different options and different sources you can get out there. I was always somebody that was into numbers, but I'm nowhere near the level of other guys in this field that are, diving deep for stats and coming up with all these different, algorithms and whatnot and putting all these spreadsheets together. I have a basic concept of how to do that kind of stuff. And I understand when somebody else is telling me their numbers, but I'm looking at different things and kind of put my own spin and feel from, eye test to gut test to analytics and numbers. And it's fun more than anything. And we try to be entertaining. We try to be right. And I feel like I have a pretty good track record with success and, what you see from players on field. And, that didn't answer your original question, did it?
No, I mean, you provided me with something that I had like to think about because I don't often get a chance to talk to any athlete from a D1 program. But having that insight, that mentality sometimes is helpful because I don't know. I don't have that background. I've never been around guys, what they think about their future in pro sports, what they think about their life is like during the college days. Just even getting recruited, I guess, even that part plays into how it shapes their personality sometimes, or how it affects them, putting some certain expectations and pressures on young people. And some are more mature to handle it, others may not be. And all these factors you don't get from numbers, you don't get from algorithms and models. And that does play a role that we cannot account for without being in the locker room with them, without being in the workroom with them. So those factors are important, and I think you are one of the few people who are doing this with that kind of insight and background into fantasy football and dynasty. So it's been a whirlwind. It's been a whirlwind from the draft on. We see a lot of shifting of values pre-draft to post-draft. So in your way, in your approach to dynasty, in your approach to fantasy football, how are you making sense of these ADP that are not set in stone, and people up until now, 2 weeks after the draft, people still couldn't come to a consensus of who the top 8 aside from Saquon Barkley? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this I've maintained this since we started this, like I said, back in November, that to me it's 1-1, and then I really don't care to be in the first round. Not that I couldn't find somebody I'd want or be comfortable with taking, but I just feel like I'm going to be open for anybody from 1-2 to 2-1, and it's just going to feel uncomfortable to say, all right, I don't want to lose this guy, and I'm happy taking him, but I feel like he would have been there 2-1. And here I am taking him at 1-4. Like it just feels like it's going to be an overpay regardless. So that's why I've maintained, like, I don't really want to be in the first round unless it's 1-1. Now I've been seeing the growth of Superflex leagues. It seems like tenfold over the last 2 seasons in particular, where everybody's talking about Superflex leagues and, how to value these quarterbacks. Yeah, this is a very good quarterback class. And you have 3, if not 4, possibly even 5 within a year. Within a year could be starting quarterbacks in the NFL in good offenses on good teams. And that includes Mason Rudolph, who has great receivers, including one that he worked with in college. Now in Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger's talked about retiring the last couple seasons. Now, how much longer does he have? His comments about Rudolph notwithstanding. But you look at Lamar Jackson, who already is getting, good praise. I mean, who isn't? This is the best time of season for all players. Everybody looks amazing right now. But you figure he's going to take the torch from Joe Flacco sooner than later. And then, of course, you got Darnold on my Jets, and you got Rosen, who we talked about before, and you got Mayfield, who went 1 overall. So there's 5 guys right there, not even including the long shots. So this is the quarterback class, but even in a super flex league, like I don't know that I want to take a quarterback 1-2. I mean, I guess you kind of have to, but if this were last year, I think we'd be looking at even this year's quarterbacks a little differently. I think we'd still be valuing a running back or a wide receiver over even some of these quarterbacks. So I think in that regard, it's a little murky territory, murky ground. But I mean, even just yesterday, I was talking with John DeBarry from Dynasty Football Factory,
Yes.
and he was asking me, how do you feel about Gallup? And I said, I liked him before the draft. I liked him when I saw him in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and now I love his landing spot. And he was telling me that he took Gallup over Anthony Miller. And sorry if I'm exposing you, John, and you didn't want this public, but I don't think it's any other
John
secrets
will
I have
forgive you.
on you.
He's fine. He's fine. He's people can take advantage of him. He'll be fine.
Yes, I agree. But he was telling me, this is his home league, which is Chicago based, and he thought everybody would want Anthony Miller in that league. And I'm thinking, well, then why didn't you take Anthony Miller if he was available? Why'd you take Gallup? Thinking maybe Gallup would. I don't know. It's just a weird thing. But the point of the story was you don't really have that I got to have him guy this year outside of Barkley. So anything to me is going to kind of feel like a little bit of an overpay. And, that's the good and the bad, because the guy that goes in the third round could just as easily be the best running back or wide receiver this year or from this class as the guy that goes 1-2. I mean, it's just that, even across the board for me.
Absolutely. I think you echo some of the thoughts that I had coming into the season, is that fit does really play a role. And before we even got into the draft, a lot of players, especially wide receivers, when I talk to people in the dynasty realm, they're saying the landing spot matters for a lot of these people, for a lot of these players. And it played out that way, where certain players will have an immediate shot, while others may need some sort of situation to happen before they can have a shot there. And these people are being drafted late third, mid second, late first. It's all over the place. People couldn't find a consensus. And from what I can trying to understand is, you're saying there is no point in trading up if the player in the late second is just as good as the player in the early second.
Yeah, I would much rather have 2, mid to late first over 1 first in the top 5, or 2 or 3 second round picks, as opposed to 1-2 through 1-6. I would definitely rather have a couple darts to throw at some of these guys, because these are highly talented guys. It's not to say that they're not. It's just you don't have those dynamic guys this year. Some of the guys you've had, the past couple of years, like even last year, you look at the running back class. So, McCaffrey, we all thought he was going to be a great receiving running back. He's done it so far in year 1. Nothing looks to have changed for him, even with, the C.J. Anderson signing. Far great. We know we're getting production there. Leonard Fournette, we thought we were getting that. You look at guys like that, and that's what I mean. It's like you felt comfortable taking these guys. Do you feel comfortable with Darius Guice? I mean, Sony Michel is my number 2 running back in this class. I like the landing spot in New England, but do you feel really comfortable taking him at 1-2 or 1-3? Rashad Penny, I know he's super productive at San Diego State, but I have my questions about him as well. Now he lands in Seattle, and everybody just assumes it's a plug and play kind of situation and role. I don't feel super confident, taking him in the top 5. Same can be said for, Chubb going to Cleveland, or, Ronald Jones even in Tampa Bay. I mean, we thought we'd seen other guys flourish in that role in Tampa Bay that have shown success in the league, beyond college. So it's just a lot of question marks for me, which makes me not necessarily want anything in the top half of the first.
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with what the sentiments that you're playing out. The past few years, there were clear targets that you would want it in the top 5 picks. For example, this year, are you even certain that paying up would pay off year 1? Because landing spot has given us a lot of questions. We're hoping that through the off season that things would clarify, would clear up, and maybe will be better. But a lot of drafts are happening right now. I had already finished 3 drafts, and it's just been 2 weeks. I have a couple of more to come up, and hopefully some more news will break and will help us clarify some thoughts. One of those breaking news being that yesterday, or was it today, Mark Ingram suspended 4 games for performance enhancing drugs. Oh well. Now we got Alvin Kamara boosting up, and a lesser known running back that nobody gave any attention to, Boston Scott, is now being picked up in the last few rounds of a draft. So things do change. How do you approach that? Because you've been in this game for a long time. Values change over the offseason, even though there's like zero football played. How do you prepare yourself from May to June to July to August?
May to June to July to August. There's so many things that are going to change. And that is the good and the bad in these dynasty leagues, which are year round. I mean, we play dynasty because redraft just doesn't leave you enough meat on the bone. You sit there and you go, I made all these moves to get this roster to be a championship roster or a playoff contender or whatever it is, and then at the end of the year it's all over and I got to start from scratch. So now we start these dynasty leagues where I get to keep my work, my foresight to say, last year, for instance, you mentioned the Saints, like a Kamara, like I'm going to take him when nobody else is even talking about him late, and now I have him on my roster. That's why we play dynasty now, right? But because of that, you have guys, like you said, in May, in June, that are itchy and want to make a trade and let's do this, let's do that. It's too soon to react to a lot of the news and a lot of the stories we hear. I mean, something like Mark Ingram getting suspended 4 games, that's concrete. That's not like an injury that maybe he'll miss the start of the season, maybe he'll be ready for training camp. No, he could be in the best shape of his life. He's still going to be sitting for 4 games. So that will impede his value somewhat. You're looking at roughly a third of the fantasy season that you're going to be missing. So that decreases his value. That's going to put a boost on, Alvin Kamara's stock, who is already probably ascending maybe a little bit higher than realistically should. But my feeling is it's just, temper your anxiety in May and in June and just relax a little. If you see something that, this is the time to take gambles. You mentioned Scott. Okay, if you can find him and pick him up, if waivers are open, I'm sure he's out there. Maybe you add him. Maybe that's what you do right now, just because of those 4 games that he's probably going to be in line for. But I wouldn't do anything overly drastic at this point because, to me, like I said, so much is going to change, especially with the unknowns, like the new players on new teams or like rookies and free agents and some of these trades that we're seeing now in the NFL. It's hard to say not, to sit idly by and sit on your hands, because that's what, like I said, that's why we're in these year-round leagues. At the same time, like, however strong you feel about player A today on May 9th that we're recording this, tell me if you still feel as passionately one way or the other on August 9th, 2 months from now. And I guarantee, your opinion will probably be significantly different.
Yeah, absolutely. As Sigmund Bloom always say, and I always take his motto of saying, we don't want to overreact, but we do need to react. So things change and we have to adapt, and that's how you become better at this game. You can't sit idly by. If you want to be good at this, and if that's fun for you, just treat it as like, a part-time job, maybe 10 hours a week at least for now. I know you and I do way more than 10 hours a week, checking in and out, checking every day, making sure that we got the ounce of news that are being leaked out. So that's fun. That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to this season and having people like you promoting your work, being able to inform us what to look out for and how to properly react. Now let's play a little game, Andy, before we close out. I want to throw to you a game that I designed called the Inkblot test. It's a psychological test. I don't know if you heard of it. Basically, they show you a very vague inkblot and whatever first comes to mind, and that's what people have in themselves. My theory about this is if I throw you a player and you can just give me a snap idea of what how this player should be viewed coming into the 2018 season, it's you putting your process into hyper focus mode and without overthinking, right? So my first player to you is Carlos Hyde.
Yeah, underwhelming, I would say would be the word. Just you feel like there should be more. Um, to this point in his career, I feel like this is a great landing spot for him to get to, Cleveland. He's kind of back home, if you will. I think there's a real opportunity for him to thrive. That franchise is completely done a 180. Even prior to the draft and even prior to some of these moves they've made, I was pretty impressed with just the talent they were starting to get back once Josh Gordon got cleared. Corey Coleman, call him whatever you want. He's still a top draft pick, and as a secondary option to Josh Gordon, if he could stay healthy, that was looking like a formidable tandem right there with Njoku. And then you add Landry, and then you add, Hyde, and you draft Mayfield, and you add Tyrod Taylor. Like you start bringing in all these other pieces. All of a sudden, the attention isn't going to be on the backfield of Isaiah Crowell. And, I think he has a real nice opportunity, he has something to prove, change of scenery. And like I said, going back to the state he played his college ball in. So there's, something to be said for that as well. But yeah, in a word, first word that would come to mind would be, underwhelming.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I've always been kind of underwhelmed about the Carlos Hyde hype. I didn't understand it even as he comes in, but he has some nice skills. He proves that he can catch, he can run. He only needs to fend off Chubb for this year, and maybe he's motivated. Like you said, hometown narrative plays a role, and I don't know how these works for athletes, but sounds like a fantastic opportunity for him to at least market himself if the Browns do decide to trade him next year. Okay, my second one, dealing with a similar issue that Carlos Hyde is with someone breathing down his neck, Joe Flacco.
Underappreciated. I love Joe Flacco, and I don't know why I love Joe Flacco. He's nothing special. He's as vanilla as they come, and that's fine with me because he's showing you he can win you a Super Bowl. He's showing you he can be competent. This is. I don't want to say this in a negative way, but this is kind of where fantasy ruins certain players, where it hypes certain players up and it brings certain players up. It also kind of ruins certain players because people in the past have drafted Flacco thinking, oh, he's going to light it up and he's good for 30 touchdowns and he's going to do this and he's going to do that. And then when he doesn't, and then when he throws you 25 touchdowns and he ends up as, QB 20 instead of QB 10 because the quarterback position is just, so closely drawn together, everybody starts blaming Joe Flacco for their fantasy teams and their problems, and then it just becomes like, oh, Joe Flacco sucks and he's boring and fine, but he's still top half quarterback in the league, and like I said, that's okay with me. And I was comparing Mason Rudolph of this year to Flacco for similar reasons: size, mobility, big arm, deep ball downfield, accuracy, that kind of stuff. And I felt like that was a great player to be comp to if you're Mason Rudolph. And once you throw that out, though, people are like, really, Joe Flacco? Like, I don't want to draft that. I'm talking about Mason Rudolph, but I'm sitting there going, why wouldn't you? Like, it's such a tough position to find somebody, and you have a top half of the league that you put a good team around them, and they'll go out and win you Super Bowl. Yeah, I'll take that. But then again, that's a real world aspect. So for fantasy, I would say underappreciated for Joe Flacco.
Absolutely. I agree with you. He'll be one of my favorite late round kind of QB to target because that will allow me to pick up skill position early on. And I still have a guy who's solid. I'm not expecting fantastic numbers out of him, but he is solid. He is even QB 20. Like you mentioned, the difference between the QB 20 and the QB 15 is it's not that significant from a week-to-week basis.
Right.
But you brought on many great points that makes me appreciate Joe Flacco more. He may be underappreciated by the field, but he'll be appreciated by you and I. Last player, I have to throw this to you. This guy has, I spent a good capital to acquire him last year because I fell in love with his athleticism, but he did not show up coming off from his 1 year suspension. What do you have to say about Martavis Bryant?
Super intriguing. Um, I don't know if the switch to the Raiders, you know, gives them a significant bump up or a significant decrease, or if it remains exactly the same because you're going from uh, two offenses that are should be good passing offenses. Of course, obviously Oakland, left a lot to be desired last year. But when you think of Oakland, you think of Amari Cooper and even Adam Jordy Nelson, you think of Derek Carr, you think of the guys they have there, and you feel like this should be a good offense and this should be a good aerial offense at the very least. But he goes in and he's slated to be the third wide receiver, which is kind of where he was in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh had a dynamic wide receiver one that we all know on a first name basis. He was kind of in that 2-3 mold, never really did what was expected. Maybe you can attribute a lot of that to the suspension and the time missed. I don't know. I'm curious if Martavis Bryant is more a figment of our imagination and what we want him to be as opposed to what he actually is. And he's the type of player for me that I want to see you prove it. Guy that I've become pretty good friends with over the last year plus is Bob Long, who's well known in the industry as Mr. Consistency. And I'll take a page out of his book with this. I want to see it. Martavis Bryant, you've shown me just bits and pieces. You haven't shown me any consistency with it, and you haven't shown it for a full year at any point yet. So while I feel like your ceiling is extremely high, I feel like the idea of what you can be propels your draft capital to a point that I'm not comfortable making that investment with you. So I'm super intrigued because I want to believe, that what we think he can ultimately be, which is a double-digit touchdown scorer, a 1,500-yard receiver, 75, 80 catch kind of guy, basically, come in and do what Crabtree's done with Carr. Yeah, I think he's capable of doing it, but there is the question, and I want to see it from players before I'm ready to really make that investment. And real quick, and just to add to that, I know this is kind of a long-winded answer, but the real difference with football and baseball in that regard is baseball is you see the consistency a lot more where you trust it. So you see a guy do it for a year or two or three, and whether injured or not, if he slumps, you don't question it, you don't worry. Football, because of how quickly things change, teams change overnight, from season to season. Injuries, playing time, game calling, the structure of the game itself. There's so many variables and unpredictableness inherent in football, fantasy football in particular, that even with the guys that are consistent, you could still make a case for against. And the thing with Martavis Bryant is you make the investment and you say he's going to break out, he's going to blow up in Oakland, and you go heavy on him, and he does, you look like a genius. If he doesn't, you look like a fool. And the same can be said on the other end. So be comfortable with who you're gambling on, and I think Martavis Bryant is certainly a gamble at this point, more so than somebody I would say is a safe bet.
Absolutely. And I'm holding on to it just because of how much I paid for him last year. I know that his price will definitely come down this year, and it's a new role. I'm always wary when wide receivers change scenery. It doesn't always pan out that they have great success. We've seen only a couple of handfuls that does. Brandon Marshall comes to mind, Terrell Owens, but he's not even near close to those kind of talent and at their prime. He's shown flashes, and that's kind of sticking in my mind, and perhaps that's driving some of the biases. I still have his touchdown celebration from 2 years ago where he flipped and caught that amazing playoff touchdowns, and that it might be some of the biases that drives me towards trying to acquire him. But at the least for now, we know that he'll be cheaper than what he was last year when people still had those images of scoring double-digit touchdowns coming into this year. But we have to temper our expectations. And like you mentioned, Bob Lung is his knowledge, his wisdom is way beyond what I know, and he knows when he sees it, and that's how he can attain success. He knows which players will give you success and which players are left better off as more or less a a depth chart guy who might be useful certain weeks but cannot be relied on.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I had a great pleasure just digging into your Dynasty mind. Why don't you let people know where they can find your work, what's going on at Fantrax, and what can we look forward to through these months of the off season?
Yeah, so I've gotten big into doing these video draft guides leading up to fantasy drafts, both for baseball, football, and the NFL draft itself. As we were talking about before, the NFL draft profile series I did with John Law, we're going to do something similar. Teaming up with Dane Martinez, who's doing stuff for Fantrax now, comes over from FNTSY, and we're going to be doing a 50-player NFL fantasy football video draft guide where same format we'll be going over the guys you're on the fence about, not the no-brainers, not the first rounders, not the maybe some deep sleepers, but not the guys you're clear on yes or no. The guys you could see the argument for both, and we're going to profile them in about 5-minute videos on each and give you our takes on why we are either for them or against them, and hopefully it's strong enough to convince you one way or the other, or maybe help push you over the fence if you're on it. Majority of stuff I do, I tweet a lot, so best bet is to just follow me on Twitter. You can search People's Pen with the Z, or just put in Andy Singleton, and People's Pen should be the first one that comes up. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, search for Fantrax on YouTube, and you can see all the other work I've done. If you're into fantasy baseball, like I said, have that going as well. Fantasy football, NFL draft, and I'm always happy to engage in any conversation and give you my honest opinions, whether you like it or not. Respectful and cordial. I'm not going to say anything to demean you, or at least I'm not intending to. But if I don't agree with what you're saying, I'll tell you I don't, and I'll tell you why. So follow me on Twitter. Let's have some dynasty fantasy football conversations.
Absolutely, and that's fantastic. Your Twitter handle, people can see it on this video, and they can follow you if they want to know how to spell your name. It's right there, guys. Before signing out, I also know that you are teaming up with FF Ghost on something on Fantrax.
Yeah, Ryan is a great friend of mine. He's bar none one of the best commissioners out there. I'm in a couple of his leagues that he runs. He runs a whole boatload of them. I don't know what exactly we're doing yet, but we always try to do something together. Last year, I did a fantasy football video guide again, if you will, and brought in a bunch of different guests. So Ryan came in and did 5 players with me. But yeah, Ryan and I just, we try to make something happen. So I'm not even sure what it is yet, but we will be doing something together. So stay tuned and keep your eyes out for that one.
Yes, exciting news behind the scenes. That's where we're being worked on. This is what a fantastic time, guys. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, like he mentioned, like Andy mentioned, because it's free. It's free things that you can get, and you get the thoughts, you get clear-cut, unfiltered, or uncensored. I don't know if it's true or not, but very professionally done videos and highlights. My name is Chris Chung. You can find me at FF Dynasty 101. This is an episode of Dynasty Mind, a feature of Fake Pigskin. Thank you so much, Andy, for coming on tonight.
Appreciate you having me, man. Hope I didn't disappoint, and like I said,
no disappointment
we'll continue
at all.
The conversation.
Yes, we're continuing on that, and we're building each other's dynasty processes. All right, good night, people.
Sounds good.